Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, you are a good and a gracious God. We come before you today as humble servants. When we look at our society and our culture, there are times when we feel powerless. We feel overwhelmed. If we ever needed you, Lord, it is now. We pray for hope. Hope for a better future. Hope for a better society. Hope for a renewed outpouring of your love and your kindness. They say the sky is darkest just before the light. We pray that this is true, for too often these days it seems dark. We need your light, Lord, in every way. We pray to be filled with your light, to bask in your glory, to know that all is part of your plan as you wish it to be. Lord, help us to walk in your light. Bring that light to a culture that's in so desperate need of you. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, in unity with the Holy Spirit, God, forever and ever.
Amen.
If you've noticed in the prayers, you may notice it in church, that in the rubrics of the Mass, they've taken out one God forever and ever. It's now just God forever and ever. And that's truer to the translation. There was never one in Latin in the original. So we've always said one God forever and ever, and in fact, in Latin there was no one. So what we've done is just basically gone to the true translation. So let's talk about our program once again. This is on form.org at home. Once again, study questions are in the back of the book and each chapter. And don't forget the homework, the commit section. So in 2 minutes, I want to briefly summarize where we've come, because we're going to make a little shift tonight. And what has happened in the last 2 weeks, the first 4 sessions, is Dr. Sri has been teaching us about the challenges of talking about morality in this culture, this relativistic culture in which we live. As a way of understanding where we're coming from, Dr. Sri spent the last 4 sessions talking about ethics and giving us a background. And mainly the difference between a modern view of ethics and the classical Christian, Judeo-Christian view of ethics and morals. The modern approach, remember, is related to what? What do I do in this situation? It's a reactive type of approach. What do I do in a moral situation? Which is very important, but it's reactive. The classical view pertains to character. Who am I? If you've developed your character, if you've got a strong sense of who you are morally, ethically, then what is going to be easy? When you get in those moral situations, it's going to be a lot easier if you've got a good foundation in who you are morally. Remember, we are, man as he is, and we're constant. This is us right now. In all our goodness and all our faults, we're always striving to be better in the moral life, in the Christian life. This is where we want to be. This is our telos. This is our purpose in life. And we're always striving to go from here to here, right? And we do that, why? Well, we do that, as Matthew Kelly would say, his favorite line is to be the best version of ourselves. We're always striving to be the best version of ourselves and to reach our full potential, to be ultimately in a state of happiness. We're created in the image and likeness of God, so our end telos is going to be being in relationship with God and one another. So that's where we jump, where we want to be, and we want to get to relationships. God is love. So ultimately, we are created to love. And this is where we find our ultimate happiness. So how do we do this? How do we build these relationships? And it's through these virtues. So the virtues we've talked about, not just the theological virtues, but all the virtues. There's thousands of virtues: patience, kindness, generosity, charity, chastity, and so on and so forth. Those virtues give us all the tools we need. They are the skills we need to reach and improve and maximize our relationships, and that gives us the freedom to love God and one another. So that's the first 4 episodes right there. And how does this happen? Remember, the word freedom, I think, is very important to stress. Freedom is a word you have to be very cautious with when you're talking to moral relativists, because people who are relative in their morals love the word freedom. We love the word freedom, but I think our definitions of freedom are 2 different things. Relativists like to say, well, don't infringe on my freedom. When you have your morals and you're set in this moral life, you're infringing on my freedom to choose, to fill in the blank, to choose to have an abortion, to choose to get married to my same-sex partner, to choose whatever. So we got to be careful with the word freedom. Dr. Sri is not talking about that type of freedom. That type of freedom is not freeing at all. What he's talking about is freedom that leads us to excellence. And he used the example of the 2 guys playing the guitar, right? Remember that? They were both free to play the guitar. One who was skilled and went through a process to learn how to play that was free to play the guitar with excellence, and therefore was free to create with the gifts he was given. The other kid had never played guitar. He's certainly free to play it, but he's not going to play it with excellence. And it's not going to enhance his life or his relationships or give him any kind of virtue at all. So we're talking about freedom for excellence. And how do you gain that? Remember the kid playing the guitar? He went through the history. He gained that by linking up with an instructor, by learning music theory, by practicing, by mastering one instructor and moving on to the next. So he did that through a great tradition of learning, student to master. And that's how we learn these virtues. We don't learn virtues from a book, we learn them from each other. We learn them through our actions and by experiencing what a virtue actually is. And that's where tradition and community come in. And when all this is in sync, when all this works, and of course, we're striving for this constantly, we're in the state of what he referred to as the art of living. The art of living is when our moral life is balanced. We may not be perfect, we're still striving to be our best version, but we're working toward it and we're gaining these virtues and we're living our relationships. That's the ultimate goal, the art of living. That's what Dr. Sri calls it. So why is that important? Well, the reason it's important is because we live in a world that doesn't do this. We live in a world that just responds to everything. We live in a world that not only doesn't do this, they don't believe it. And they have no moral compass, no moral direction. And that if we are to communicate with people, if we're following this model and somebody outside isn't, we're never going to get anywhere. One thing I've noticed in the videos is when he talks about confronting relativists, if you notice this, he always says, well, I talked to this guy, and he'll always say, I didn't convince him. I didn't convince him that my way was right. But it opened up a dialogue for us to start communicating. And it opened up a dialogue that showed that we respected each other regardless of our views. So what he's doing here is teaching us this model so we can communicate with other people. That's the entire goal here. So tonight we're going to take a step We've learned the background. We understand this. And oh, by the way, there's a handout if you want a copy of this. And tonight we're going to study, or start studying, the 7 steps. He's referred to these 7 steps on how to engage moral relativism. So that's what we're going to go into tonight. The background's been set. Now we're going to look at the practical aspects. All right?
I greet you all in the name of Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life.
There's so many different conceptions of what marriage is like. Now, Paul has a very intense personality. If both of us don't really about self-presence,
So now we're ready to look at 7 keys for engaging our relativistic friends. So I want to give you 7 keys in your pocket, and you're not going to use all of them at the same time necessarily, but it's just good to have them in your pocket that could be helpful for you. Before we move on, I want to just let you know, some people were asking about that article that I was drawing from. You can find it online. It's just called The Lost Art of Apprenticeship. The Lost Art of Apprenticeship. But let's take a look at the first key for engaging our relativistic friends. First, lead with mercy. Lead with mercy. What do I mean by that? You know, a popular image for the church in the modern world, one that Pope Francis has often used, is that the church is like a field hospital. You know, a field hospital out on the battlefield, when you're bringing in patients that have been shot and they've got urgent medical needs. When they come into the hospital, you don't say, oh, let's talk about your blood sugar level here. Oh, you have too much cholesterol. I mean, those might be real issues, but you got to deal with the most urgent, the most pressing matters first. Your spleen is ruptured. We got to deal with this. So the same is true with the situation where we are in the church today. As the modern world continues to turn away from the gospel and traditional values, as we've seen, people's lives are suffering. We've lost that art of living. We don't know how to live life well because we've deliberately disconnected ourselves from this great tradition on how to live life. And so as Pope Francis has said, in this modern, secular, relativistic world, he says, quote, humanity is wounded, deeply wounded. Humanity is wounded, deeply wounded. He goes on to say relativism wounds people. Relativism wounds people. Why? Because instead of helping people learn the art of living, to learn how to live friendship well, courtship well, marriage well, all these things, we just say do whatever you want. Doesn't matter. And so people are wounded from this, and they're wounded not just for their own uncertainty on how to live life, but the effects that that's had on them and their relationships, the way other people have treated them. If there is no right or wrong and everyone could just do whatever they want, then if, my dad runs off with some other woman, well, I mean, that's not right or wrong. I don't really feel good about that, but there's no right or wrong, and I guess he's free to do that. Or if I'm in a dating relationship and I feel like this person, said he loved me, but, he was really just using me, well, that's just life. Everyone's free to do whatever they want. There's no right or wrong. It encourages people to use each other, to not fulfill their responsibilities to one another, and so that's why Pope Francis says, quote, relativism wounds people. And so we have to address these deep wounds. We can talk about morality. We need to talk about these moral issues, and the other points we get to are going to address that. But first and foremost, I want you to be aware of the person sitting right in front of you. That person right in front of you is a real person that probably is carrying some of their own hurts and their own wounds. No matter how self-confident they may be appearing on the outside, no matter how put together they may appear, or how disregarding of religion they might be, just know that that's the person on the outside. We all have our stuff that we have to deal with. Mistakes we've made, sins we've committed, things we regret, and things that have happened to us things that were out of control, where we were inflicted with pain from someone else. This is all the real drama of life. You know, I was talking to my asthma doctor recently, who was asking me about this image of the church as a field hospital, and I said to her, you know, so imagine if there was some patient of yours, a young boy, who is severely allergic to dogs, and one day he goes and plays with a really furry dog, and he gets a horrible asthmatic attack. They have to call 911, get an ambulance, and they bring him to the hospital, and you show up there. Is your first word going to be to him, hey, don't you know you're not supposed to play with dogs? Why were you playing with the dogs? No, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to try to just get this kid breathing again. You've got to deal with the most urgent matters first. There's a time to give him the moral lesson. Don't play with the dogs because you're severely allergic to them. But that's not right now. Right now, you've got to get this kid breathing. You got to save his life. And there are so many people deeply wounded around us. We just have to just recognize it. And so we need to lead with mercy. Now, what does that mean to lead with mercy? I want to talk about, there are two key pillars to mercy. On one hand, there's forgiveness, and on the other hand, there's a healing power that comes in God's mercy. That God doesn't want to just pardon us. He wants to help us. He wants to heal us. He wants to comfort us in our afflictions. He wants to heal us of our bad habits and deep wounds. He wants to change our hearts so that we can live better. We can live the art of living. We can grow in virtue and overcome these deep hurts and weaknesses in our lives. So healing and forgiveness are the two key pillars of mercy we've got to keep in mind. Jesus in his public ministry went around forgiving people's sins, and he went around healing them of all their diseases and infirmities. Both of those are all wrapped up in God's mercy. Why is that so important? Again, because we live in a secular culture that's turned away from the art of living, people are wounded from this. And we've made mistakes because we don't know how to live well. We can't just go and just teach people, here's the moral law. If that's all we do and we don't accompany it with mercy, we're just going to wipe people out. Let's take, for example, the addiction to pornography so many young men have. And increasingly so many young women have today. You know, many of them, they were just curious. They got involved, someone showed it to them, and they weren't necessarily seeking it out, and all of a sudden, it becomes an addiction for them. If I go to a college campus, and I'm going to give a talk on pornography and say, hey guys, you shouldn't be doing that, don't you know that's mortal sin? Again, I might be speaking truth, but it's not helpful. I'm just going to discourage them because they're feeling, I just can't change. I've tried and I'm stuck. They need to know the message of God's mercy. They need to know that no matter how many times they've fallen, and even if they fall again, God loves them. He's going to forgive you. He loves you. If you just turn to him, he wants to forgive you. He just wants you to get back up and try again. He loves you so much, and he wants to help you. And if you keep going back to him and keep going back to confession, there's grace that comes, and over time, God can change your heart. And then you can tell stories, because I know of men who've been addicted for many years from their childhood, and they were changed. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen over the course of a month, or maybe even the course of a year, but over time, they were changed. We've got to give them hope. What we don't want is people's fear that they can't be forgiven, or their shame, or their fear that they're unlovable, to keep them from taking that next step of faith and embracing the moral truth. Now I want you to do something. I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Just close your eyes for a moment. I want you to just think about what's your most embarrassing sin? Something that you'd be so afraid if other people knew about. You know, maybe it was something from your teenage years. Maybe it's something you're struggling with right now. What is that hidden sin? Now just keep your eyes closed and just imagine if all of a sudden that sin came out. Other people just found out about it. Now they're all talking about it. Everybody knows about that. How do you feel? You probably feel very ashamed, super embarrassed, maybe frustrated with yourself, frustrated with the people who are talking about it, angry with yourself. Why did I do this to begin with? And then imagine in the midst of all of this, imagine Jesus coming up to you, looking you in the eye, holding your hand and saying, neither do I condemn you. I forgive you. Go and sin no more. Just imagine how liberating that'd be. Jesus coming and saying, I forgive you. And then giving you a fresh start and encouraging you on the way. Now open your eyes, because you know that story. That's what happened to this woman who had been caught in adultery in John's Gospel, chapter 8. She was given this new start. And we need to give people that experience. We want to give them that hope. I mean, she felt horrible, I'm sure. You know, why did I do this? She was, before anyone was going to throw stones at her, she was probably ready to throw stones at herself. And yet Jesus came and said, I love you. I love you. I forgive you. I don't condemn you. I want to help you. People need to know the hope of God's mercy. No matter what they've done, no matter how many times they've done it, no matter how long they've been away from God, we've got to constantly offer them the message of God's love. Jesus is there. He's reaching out. He's just reaching out. Come. Just come back. He's not going like this. I know what you did. No, he's just his arms open wide. We've got to preach the news of God's love and mercy and give people the hope that not only will he forgive, he wants to heal us and change us, to help us to overcome whatever struggles we are facing on our own. Now, a second point. So lead with mercy is the first thing I want you to keep in mind. A second key point I want us to keep in mind is also how we need to do what Pope Benedict had once said. Pope Benedict actually was writing about the topic of relativism once. It was before, this was actually while he was Pope. He was in a dialogue with an Italian secular philosopher about morality. And Pope Benedict noted how there was a philosopher by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, for the end of the 19th century, he taught people the best way to attack Christianity. He said, too many people, when they're trying to attack Christianity, Nietzsche was an atheist, and said, everyone tries to go after Christianity's truth claims. Is the Bible true? Is it really inspired by God? Is Jesus divine? Did he establish a church? They focus on the truth claims. And Nietzsche says, that's not what we need to do. If we really want to topple Christianity, what we need to do is focus on Christianity's moral vision. Because many times Christianity's moral vision is presented as very beautiful, love your neighbor as yourself, forgive your enemy, serve the poor. But we need to show that the Christian morality is actually something very evil. It's evil, it's harmful to human persons, it's something that should be disgusting, something that should be repulsive, something that there's no fun in this, no joy in this, no happiness in this. We would never want to choose this way of life. If we can frame Christianity as something repressive, something harmful, something that keeps us from being happy and experiencing the fullness of life, then we win. And Ratzinger was basically saying, Pope Benedict, Nietzsche was right. That is a great way to attack Christianity. But we need to make our counter case. And Pope Benedict said, the reason people have abandoned Christianity today is often not because they doubt the truth claims, but because they find Christianity's way of life unconvincing. And we need to do what the early church did in ancient pagan Rome. We need to show how the pagan way of life is empty. And we need to contrast that with the joy that comes from the Christian way of life. And so that leads to this second point. The second key I want to give you is that we have to contrast the worldviews. What we need to do is follow what Pope Benedict says, is contrast the Christian way of life and the postmodern way of life. The Christian way of life and the relativistic way of life. The Christian worldview and the relativistic worldview. And the first way I want to do this is I want to talk about how in the Christian way or the classical worldview of life, life is a story. Life is a story. Now, what do I mean by that? We're all characters in relationships, in a plot, striving towards some goal, progressing through various harms and dangers and obstacles, and we need the virtues to help us to make it through and to be the hero of our lives. It reminds me of an opening line from Charles Dickens' famous work, David Copperfield. Will I be the hero of my own life? These pages must show. And that's my question for you. Will you be the hero of your life? Will you be the hero of your life? Another great novel story from our modern era is that of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. How many of you have watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy movie? So many of you are familiar with that. How many of you have read the books? The books are even better, right? The books are even better. Now, just take the main character Frodo in the story. Every day, Frodo is making decisions that either lead him closer toward his goal of destroying the evil ring of power, or farther away from his goal. So sometimes Frodo is very courageous, and sometimes he's very prudent, and sometimes he's very cautious and patient. And when he lives virtuously, it's getting him closer toward the goal of saving Middle-earth and destroying the evil ring. But there's other times when Frodo makes a decision that's based more on his fear. And he's tempted to put the ring on for himself, or he makes a rash decision. And when he does that, it's leading him farther away from his telos, from his goal of destroying the ring. But the point I want to make is that every day Frodo's making choices, and all of Middle-earth, the world of Lord of the Rings, all of Middle-earth is dependent on his choices, on what he does. His life matters. His choices matter. What he does with his life matters. And everyone else is going to feel the consequences of it. And the same is true in my life and in your life. You see, every day we're making choices that are going to either lead us closer to our telos or farther away from it. Every day I'm making choices that lead me closer to becoming the kind of person I want to be. A good son of God. A good husband to Beth. A good father to my children. A good friend to my friend. A good colleague to my coworkers. A good teacher to my students. Every day I'm making decisions that either lead me closer to that, or sadly sometimes I'm making decisions every day that lead me farther away from that, when I'm not as thoughtful and thinking about what my wife needs, or when I'm too caught up in my own thing and not spending time with my kids as much, or I'm busy doing something else and not able to give the best of myself to my students. Those things keep me away from becoming the kind of man I want to be, lead me away from my telos. And other people are affected by the choices I make, and they're affected by the choices you make. Other people are affected by that, for better or for worse. You know, a lot of young people say, I want to make a difference in life. I want to have an impact. You ever hear someone say that? Well, guess what? You're going to make an impact. You are. You are going to make a difference. The question is it going to be a good impact or a bad one? And that's dependent on the choices you make, because your choices matter. Will you be the hero of your own life? Now, a relativistic culture is ultimately saying your choices don't matter. There's no meaning to your choice. There's no right or wrong choice. There's no good or bad choice. Just all that matters is that you choose. It doesn't matter what you choose. Just do whatever you want. And when our choices don't matter, in the end, what we're being told is our life doesn't really matter. What I do with my life doesn't really matter. I mean, imagine if the whole story of Lord of the Rings, you know, the world of Middle-earth was a relativistic world. Just imagine that for a moment. Like, there's no right or wrong, no good or bad, no good choices, bad choices. Imagine if it doesn't matter what Frodo does with the Ring of Power. It doesn't matter whether he destroys the ring in Mount Doom, or he hands it to the Dark Lord Sauron, or he uses it for himself. It doesn't matter. All that matters is Frodo chose. Would that be an interesting book? Would that be an interesting movie? That'd be boring, right? If nothing matters, no choice matters, that would be really boring. All that matters is Frodo chooses. That's a relativistic world. So, when I come to contrasting the worldview here, in the classical worldview, life is a story. I put my life in a narrative scheme. All my choices are either leading me closer to becoming the man I want to be or farther away from that. And I need the virtues to help me to fulfill that. Now, the relativistic worldview is basically life has no plot. Life has no story. You give your life your own meaning. You know, a second way of seeing this contrast is to see the way we view the self. So if we could go to the next slide here, we'll see the first, in the classical worldview, how does one view himself? Well, I find myself in wanting to find my fulfillment in my relationships. So all these fundamental relationships, my relationship with God, my parents, my spouse, my kids, my friends, my co-workers, my parish, my neighborhood, my community, my country, all of these relationships are fundamental to who I am. And this is something, again, Pope Benedict, as Cardinal Ratzinger had written about. He said, man lives in relationships, and the ultimate goodness of his life depends on the rightness of his essential relationships. I mean, father, mother, brother, sister, and so forth. And ultimately our relationship with God. So this is where we find our happiness. We see ourselves as intrinsically connected to these other people. And how well am I doing in living these relationships? St. John Paul II often said, you know, if we want to find ourselves, we want to find our fulfillment in life, I want to find myself, I find myself by making myself a gift to others. So there's this outward view of the self, that when I give myself to God, I give myself to the other people in my life, that's where I'm going to find my happiness. That's the classical understanding. But in a relativistic worldview, it's very different. In the relativistic worldview, what we do, instead of finding ourselves in our relationships, we actually have to separate ourselves from our relationships. I want to separate myself from the people in my life. And what I'm going to do there is just, then if I want to have a relationship with God or my parents or my siblings, that's fine. You want God in your life? Hey, that's great for you if that works for you. But if you don't want, that's fine too. It doesn't matter what you choose. All that matters is you just chose. Hey, you want to be the kind of, parent that pours your life out in your kids? Hey, if that works for you, that's great. But if you'd rather focus on sports or focus on your career or focus on your favorite hobbies, that's fine too. It doesn't matter, what kind of parent you are. It's just you're your own kind of parent. That's all that matters. Hey, if you want to give yourself to your kids or to your spouse and have a good, strong marriage, that's great if that works for you. But if your marriage is really hard and you lost that love and feeling and you want to go off with someone else, that's fine too if that works for you. So I separate myself. I detach myself from those relationships. I'm a blank slate. I actually find myself by detaching myself from others. Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, says this about the autonomous self. He says, this is basically the modern way of thinking. He says, people say, life is basically complicated and short. I want to get as much out of it as possible, and no one has the right to stand in my way. Before all else, I have to be able to seize my piece of life to fulfill myself. And no one has the right to interfere with me. Anyone who would stand in my way is an enemy of my very self. Man is conceived in purely individualistic terms. The relation that is an essential part of him, is taken away from him. So do you see, instead of finding myself in my relationships, the way God made me, now it's like I actually have to separate myself from all these relationships. And I view those other people many times as an obstacle getting in the way of what I want to do with my own life. So the view of the self is very different. Now, let me just, one more thing here. If you think about, if life is about relationships, if we have that's where the drama of life is played out. The life is a story. This is the telos. If in relativism there is no telos, what's going to suffer most? If our telos, if the way God made us is for relationships, and relativism says there's no telos, what's going to suffer the most in life? Our relationships. That's what we're seeing here. These are all secondary. It's more about me. And I use the relationships if they're useful for me, beneficial, enjoyable for me, but it's not the place where I find my happiness, unless I just happen to choose it. I want to go to the next slide to flesh this out a little bit more. What's a good life? What's a good life? What's a good watch? A good watch is a watch. What's the function of a watch? To tell us of a watch, to tell time. What's a good life? A good human life is a life that fulfills its relationships. So in other words, a good life is a good son of God, a good husband, a good friend, a good father. That's what a good life is. And so the way we traditionally would have passed on the art of living, at the focus of education, of formation, was training people to be a good citizen, to be a good friend, to be a good husband, to be a good father, to be a good son of God. That's what we're encouraging people to do. But today, in a relativistic mindset, there is no purpose to life. Everyone just decides for themselves what's right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. You just do whatever you want. Now, it's just simply, what's a good life? What's a good man? Well, just someone who just did whatever he wanted. He chose. Hey, choose for yourself. And so while we used to encourage people, hey, be a good friend, be a good virtuous friend, be a good husband someday, be a good father someday. You know what advice I got growing up? I remember you probably heard it too. Be yourself. I remember as a kid wondering, well, who else am I going to be? That's the kind of empty advice we give people today. Now, don't get me wrong. I know some people mean in terms of, don't be swayed by other people's influence. But in the end, we don't really give people a roadmap, something to go for in life. And so our relationships end up becoming just very instrumental. Our view of justice is also different. If you contrast the classical understanding of justice, is other-centered. It's outward-looking. It's more about, what do I owe other people? How do I fulfill my responsibilities with my God, with my friends, with my employer, with my country, with my spouse, with my kids? What do I owe others? How do I fulfill my responsibilities? Whereas the relativistic modern understanding of justice is all inward-looking. It's all about not responsibilities, but rights. What do other people owe me? Other people owe me this. Very self-centered. And it's all about, I have the right to do this with my life. Don't tell me what to do. Finally, and probably the biggest contrast, comes with freedom. So we saw the classical understanding of freedom is freedom for excellence, right? It's the ability to do things with high quality, perform actions with excellence. Like a musician, we need the skills to live life well, the virtues. But the modern understanding of freedom is freedom from. The classical understanding is more about freedom. I have virtues so that it's for something. It's so that I can love others. I can give myself in love to others. It's for friendship. But the modern understanding freedom is not about others. It's not for friendship. It's actually, I want to be free from friendship. I want to be free from other people limiting me, restricting me, keeping me from doing what I want. Don't tell me what to do. You church, or mom and dad, or my country. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I'm going to just do whatever I want with my life. Pope John Paul II talked about this modern self-centered view of freedom. This idea, I'm free to do whatever I want with my life, contrasted with, let me be free to give the best of myself to others. This modern relativistic understanding, John Paul II called it, is a self-centered concept of freedom. Instead of seeing freedom as about acquiring the skills so I can give the best of myself in love to others, it's more about, let me do whatever I want with my life. Do you hear how self-centered that is? I'm going to close with this true story. I once worked, before I did theology, in the corporate world, and I remember there was 2 marriages within just blocks of each other in the same neighborhood. In one marriage, young couple, they had 3 kids. Wife came down with brain cancer, quickly in a wheelchair. This wasn't what the man was expecting. It's not what he was hoping for in his marriage, and it was just too much pressure economically, financially, emotionally, and so he left her for another woman. He left her for another woman. In our country, is he free to do that? Can we say what he did was wrong? You might not do that, but hey, there's no right or wrong. He's free to do that. He made a choice. We should celebrate. He chose. 2 blocks the other direction, another couple. This one, they're in their 50s. The man has his own business, prime of his career, and all of a sudden his wife has a severe form of MS, reduced to a wheelchair. And you know what he did? It was so hard. He gave up everything. He sold his business to commit his life to serve her. And he spent all of his savings knowing that in his own golden years after she would die, he'd have nothing. He'd have to start all over. This woman, she couldn't eat. She couldn't dress herself. She couldn't clean herself. She couldn't even talk. And every day he was there, cleaning her, feeding her, talking to her, telling her updates on friends, telling her about her favorite sports team, just going out, giving her walks. I remember I had a chance to meet her, and she was just leaned over just like this. She couldn't say a single word. Could you imagine how hard that would be to be in a marriage like that? You can't even talk to the love of your life. But this man saw his life in a story, and his life took an unexpected turn, but he became a hero because he saw freedom wasn't just about doing whatever I want with my life, but he possessed virtue because he saw what a good life was. It wasn't about him, but it was about living our relationships to the best. And when the time came for him to step up to the plate, he knocked it out of the park because he gave himself in love. What view of life do we want? A relativistic culture says both marriages were the same. There's no right or wrong. Everyone's just able to do whatever they want. Deep down, we all know that second man is a hero. You ladies wish that you could marry, you single ladies here, you'd love to marry a man that would lay down his life for you like that, wouldn't you? All the men here, you hear a story like that, and deep down you hope, man, that would be really hard, but I hope I can do it. We need to contrast the worldviews. We need to show people, you want relativism? Relativism is going to support situations like number 1. It's going to enable people to do whatever they want with their life. Or do we want a life that's about living our relationships with love and fulfilling our responsibilities and our commitments to others? Because that's where we find our happiness, when we live the way God made us.
I greet you all in the name of Jesus Christ. He is the way, the truth, and the life.
There's so many different conceptions of what the other teaching are doing. Now, Cody had a very intense personality. If most of us don't feel about
We've been looking at 7 keys for engaging our relativistic friends. Keys we have in our pocket, we don't use them all at once, but they're available to you at the different moments. And so one key thing we looked at was the lead with mercy. We talked about we live in a wounded world. People have made bad choices because they've never been taught the art of living. Many times it may not be fully their fault, but they feel bad about some things they've done, or they're carrying wounds that have been inflicted upon them. We've got to lead with the message of God's love and mercy and his healing power. Secondly, we talked about how we have to contrast the worldviews, Pope Benedict's point. Is that we can't just come in with logical arguments. We got to show people, hey, if you want relativism, this is what it looks like. Contrast it with, this is what the modern world, or the classical understanding, Catholic view of life is about. Life is a story, our choices matter, and we find the drama of our life in our relationships. That's where we're going to find our happiness and the freedom to love people. But if you want to live in a world that says there is no meaning and your choices don't matter, your life doesn't really matter, and life is just all about you and whatever you want to do with your life, and it's not about fulfilling your relationships with others, then this is what your world is going to look like. And it's really important, like in ancient Rome, for the Christians to contrast the Christian way of life with the pagan world around them. I want to come to a third point now, and that is law equals love. Law equals love. We've got to keep this in mind, that the moral law is all about love. Now, I was flying back from the East Coast recently, and I was sitting on the plane as they were boarding, so I sat down, and then somebody else was shortly behind me and then stopped right next to me and then put his face down into mine and says, "Excuse me, are you Edward Sri?" I said, yeah. And he said, "Oh, wow, I've been watching the Augustine Institute's program on Symbolon, and I thought I saw you from there, and I love this program. I'm learning so much about the Bible and about Christianity, about the Catholic Church, and I'm not even Catholic. I'm a Methodist, and I can't wait for the show to come on that Catholic channel every day, and I just love watching it, and here you are, I've got some questions. Can I ask you some questions when we get up in the air?" And I was like, "Oh, sure." And at first I was thinking, oh, wow, this is great. Here's a fan of the Institute's program, and he's probably got some easy questions like, Mary in the Bible. Oh, that'll be easier. Or confession. Oh, that'll be easy questions, right? So we get up 38,000 feet, we level off, and he comes and taps me on the shoulder. We're standing in the aisle now, talking to each other, and everyone around, they're just busy doing their own thing. They're reading their newspapers, they got their computers out, they're all just there, kind of oblivious to our little theological conversation at 38,000 feet. And until all of a sudden he says, "Oh, it's so good to meet you, and I've been wanting to ask someone this question for a long time, and so here's my question. When is the Catholic Church going to update all of its teachings on sexuality?" And all of a sudden, everybody around went like this. They put down what they're doing. Now they're keyed in, right? And what do I say? I can't teach a theology of the body course at 38,000 feet in the aisle. And this man just kept going on and on. He kept saying, the Catholic Church is just out of touch. All the other Christian denominations, they've gotten with the times, they've updated the teachings, and, these things come out of the medieval period, it's repressive, we shouldn't be doing theology in the bedroom, why don't we get with the modern times? And he just kept going on, and he was very kind, but persistent and intense. And finally I realized I just had to cut in to get a word, and finally I just said, excuse me, do you work with young people? I said, because I do. I work with thousands of young people with an organization called Focus. I work with college students, students at the Augustine Institute. I work with thousands of young people and young adults. And the ideas you're describing, those are the ideas of the sexual revolution. That's the mainstream of the culture right now. That's what these young people have grown up with. And you know what they're telling me? It's not working for them. When they're honest, and they come out and they just talk to me one-on-one, they say, yeah, I've tried this and it just doesn't work. They've experienced the hookup culture. They've experienced free-flowing relationships, casual sex, and it causes them great pain. A lot of them have grown up and they've not seen true love modeled for them by their parents. Many of them come from broken homes, and that adds on a whole other layer of hurt and insecurity. And is this what do you want to inflict upon young people? Do you know why the Catholic Church teaches what it teaches? And why it's always going to teach what it teaches on sexuality? It's because the Catholic Church loves people. I wasn't expecting that kind of an answer. Yes, the Catholic Church loves people. Because we know that what the world is offering isn't working. It's actually causing great pain and heartache in young people's lives. And I share with them about how young people are not even bothering getting married anymore. The number of people getting married just keeps plummeting. And so the younger generation is like, marriage, why bother? We live together, we like each other, we've got good jobs. Why do I need some certificate from some church? And so the fewer and fewer of them are even bothering going through the process of marriage. And yet, this is fascinating, utterly fascinating. Even though fewer and fewer people are getting married, if you ask the average adult in the United States, what are some of your top goals in life? You know what they say? They list as one of their top goals in life. Over 90% of Americans will say one of their top goals in life is to have a happy marriage someday. To have a happy marriage. Isn't that fascinating? So people are getting married, but they still want to get married. Wow, what's going on here? I think what we see is that as deeply wounded people are in the culture, and as relativistic as the culture is, these are still human persons out there. And God made every human person with a desire to love and to be loved. Not to be used, not a temporary love, but a committed love, a lasting love. That's what we long for. But the younger generation, they have this longing for it, but they just don't think it's possible. That's why they're very blue on marriage, cynical on marriage, because again, their experience of love is just, I've been used, and it doesn't work out, and they've watched the generation before them. They've seen so many broken marriages. They just don't think marriage is possible, lasting love is possible. And that's why we've got to preach the good news of marriage. Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, other popes have talked about this. Marriage is good news right now, because if we're made for a lasting love, but we don't think it's possible, the church can come in and say, no, that desire you have for love is good. And you can have that desire fulfilled if you follow God's plan, not what the world is offering. Now, these are some of the ideas I shared with my Methodist friend at 38,000 feet, and I can't say I convinced him right there, but I certainly slowed him down, and we certainly pondered and started recognizing, admitting a couple things, and pondering the issue better. And I think that's sometimes all we can do in an initial conversation, is get people to slow down in their confidence in relativism, and to start pondering and considering the deeper questions about life here. But what we need to do is always bring everything back to love, and that's what I tried to do quickly in that conversation with him. Why does the Catholic Church teach what it teaches on sexuality? It's because the Catholic Church loves people. We should love people. What is love? Love is to will the good of another, to seek what's best for someone else. It's not just some feeling or some emotion or some sensual pleasure I receive. No. Real love is to will the good of another, to seek what's best for someone else. Real love is modeled by Jesus Christ, who laid down his life for our good, for our happiness, for our salvation. That's what love is. And if we love people, we want what's best for them. And we need to show people that, whatever moral issue you may be talking about, whether it's on sexuality, whether it's on contraception, whether it's on abortion, whether it's on the environment, whether it's on immigration, I don't care what the issue is, whatever issue you're talking about, always frame it in the context of love. Always be thinking about how does this relate to love? Well, first of all, we have to know that it comes from love. Whatever this moral issue is, the moral teaching of the church, the moral teachings of Jesus Christ come from God's love for us, as we saw earlier. God gives a law because he loves us. He wants us to be happy. He knows how we work. He knows if we do this, we'll be happy, but if we do this, we're not going to be happy. That's where the law comes from. It comes from love. Always bring that point out. People, they don't think about morality this way. They think about it as just some rules from some church. They're trying to impose it on other people. These are hoops we have to go through to get to heaven. I have to be just a good person, and that's why I have to follow this. No. This is coming from God's love. Bring that point out. It comes from God's love, and it also helps us to love. So whether it's the church's social teaching, this isn't about, just helping other people. Yes, when I go and I give money to the poor and serve the poor, hopefully the poor are changed. They're better off a little bit more now. But the bigger change that's going on isn't in the poor, it's in me. Is that I'm becoming aware of another person. And I see them in solidarity. I see them as a brother in the human family. And now something has changed in me. My heart has changed. I'm going out more in love. Same thing, the life issues. This is about helping me to view the weakest members of the human family with greater love and care. Whether it's the unborn child in the womb or the elderly person or the handicapped, these people, sometimes our society just views them as a burden. They view them as a financial burden or a burden on our time, a drain on our energy, an obstacle to just letting me do whatever I want in life. No, all these teachings are about helping me to grow in love, to care for the weakest members of society who need our love and care and attention all the more. So law equals love. Let's always bring that point out. It comes from love. The moral law comes from love. And the moral law is there to help us to grow in love. Now I want to go to a fourth point. So we talked about leading with mercy, contrasting the worldviews, law equals love. The fourth point I want to highlight is how we want to make a distinction between making a judgment and judging someone's soul. Making a judgment and judging someone's soul. Many times people think that when we disagree with someone, that just simply means, that I hate you. If we have, a conflict over a certain issue, I disagree with you, it means I hate you. I'm going to quote to you from a famous Protestant pastor by the name of Rick Warren. He once said this: "Our culture has accepted two huge lies. The first is that if you disagree with someone's lifestyle, you must fear or hate them. The second is that to love someone means you agree with everything they believe or do. Both are nonsense. You don't have to compromise conviction to be compassionate." Isn't that true? That's what we think. We think, if I disagree with someone, that means I hate you or I'm afraid of you. And the only way I can show love means I just accept. This is just the environment around us. When we're talking with our relativistic friends, and some moral issue comes up, we're so afraid to say something. We feel paralyzed. I don't know how to do it because I don't want to sound like I'm judgmental, or I don't want them to think I don't love them. What do I do? We have to make a distinction. And as I've been speaking around the country on this topic of Catholic moral worldview and relativism, this is one point that I hear a lot of feedback on. People say, "Oh, thank you for helping me make that distinction." So just give me your best attention right now, because I think this isn't my idea. I'm drawing from many other great thinkers before me. But the distinction between making a judgment and judging someone's soul. Let me ask you, is it okay to use your mind to make a judgment? Is it okay, to just make a judgment? So it's raining outside, I'm going to get an umbrella. Is it okay to do that? Or it's a blizzard outside, I'm going to get my winter coat. Is it okay to do that? If I make a judgment, I better get my coat on. Am I a mean, judgmental, bigoted person? No, God gave me a mind. He wants me to use it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Or what if I see, my little toddler getting ready to run out into the street, and I say, "Oh, she's going to get hurt. She could get run over by a car." Or she's ready to touch a hot burning stove. Am I a mean, judgmental person if I do that? Am I judging her soul when I do that? Am I saying, "Oh, she's horrible, she's going to go to hell"? No, I'm not saying that, but I can just use my mind and go, not good for her to run into a busy street, not good for her to touch a hot stove, right? I'm just using my mind, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Can I use my mind and make a judgment about someone's choices? Can I do that without judging their soul? For example, if there's some young college student, some female student, freshman year, and she's sleeping around with one man after another, week after week after week after week, can I use my mind and make a judgment that that's not good for her? That she's not going to be happy? That she's not going to find the love that she's longing for this way? Can I use my mind to make that judgment? Absolutely. Am I judging her soul when I do that? No. I'm not judging her soul. I don't know what's going on inside of her. Her situation before God is between her and God. I can't speak into that. I don't know her background. I don't know her intentions. I don't know what she's been going through. Who am I to judge? Pope Francis would say, and rightly so. Because there's a lot more going on in a person than just the outward action that we may see. So I can objectively say, yeah, what they're doing is wrong, and they're hurting themselves and hurting others, but their status before God is between them and God alone. Let's say this poor girl Maybe she never experienced authentic love in her life, from her parents, from her own families. Maybe she was abused when she was younger. Maybe she's experienced a lot of use in her own sexual relationships, and maybe she was always trained from a young age that this is what it means to be a liberated woman, to use your sexuality this way. I don't know that. I don't know her background. But let's say she did suffer those things. Such a woman, she needs my compassion, my empathy, not just a moral lesson. She needs to know how much God loves her and how she's made for love. And God wants to help her find that great love in her life. That's what she needs. She doesn't need me just coming in with a moral lecture. Now, let me be clear. One other step in this process. I can make a judgment that what she's doing this isn't good for her. I'm not judging her soul, but let me ask you the last question, most important one. If I care about her, if I love her, should I ever say something to her about what's going on in her life? If she means anything to me at all, should I ever say something? If in other words, if let's say I'm a close, trusted friend, I'm not just some random stranger knocking on her door, you are the sinner, nothing like that. But I'm saying if I'm a trusted friend or a close, trusted family member, if I love her, should I say something? Is it the loving thing to say something? Absolutely. Remember, what is love? Is love all about I just accept whatever? No, love is I will the good of the other person. I seek what's best for the other person. And if I really love this person, I want to share with her a better way. Not because I think I'm better or I have all the answers. No, it's just, I see what you're doing, and I can tell this isn't going to work for you well. I love you. Alcoholics Anonymous, if you've ever had a family member struggle with alcoholism, Alcoholics Anonymous is known for helping families that have an alcoholic in their family. And you know what advice they give? If you have, let's say, Uncle Billy struggling with alcoholism, you know what an Alcoholics Anonymous says? Just be tolerant. Just coexist. Don't say anything. Never bring it up. No, that's not what they say. You know what they say? They say you got to do an intervention. In other words, you get all the close family and friends together, and you go to Uncle Billy. And you say, Uncle Billy, we love you, but we see what you're doing. We see how you're hurting yourself, and how you're hurting Aunt Sally, and it hurts us. This is what it's doing to us when we see you doing this. And you're doing it out of love. That is love. Is it the loving thing to do to sit back and do nothing and say nothing? I mean, imagine that. Remember the story I told you about Carl, like a little boy that was stuck on the monkey bars? My little 13-month-old climbing up the monkey bars, he got stuck on the top. Do you remember that? And he's hanging there for dear life. Imagine if I come running out and I see Carl there and I go, oh wait, I don't want to be judgmental. No, the work's for you. I don't want to impose my views on being a 13-month-old on you. If you want to, hang from the monkey bars, that's fine. I'm just going to be tolerant. Let's coexist until you fall and die. I mean, is that a loving thing to do? No. Real love, I use my mind to make a judgment. That's not good for you, and I want you to be happy, and I want to help you. As this reminds me, I think we've got to really make that distinction for people. And when we do that, it can open up conversation now. Conversation on the real issues. I remember flying back to Denver after a speaking event, and I was sitting on a plane, and it was one of these days I had all this grading to do, and I'm trying to get all this work done. And the woman next to me just kept asking questions and wanting to talk, and I didn't want to talk because I just wanted to get my work done. But then she asked about life in Denver, and I said, I love Denver, it's great, I like to take my kids hiking. She said, oh, you have kids? She said, how many? I said, oh yeah, well, I've got 7 kids and 1 on the way. Oh, wow, you have kids here. I said, do you have any children? She goes, well, me and my partner were thinking of adopting. And all of a sudden I realized I'm sitting next to 2 lesbians. I didn't notice it earlier. So I said, I'm going to engage in conversation. And we had this great conversation just about life, about her career, and she asked me about life, and what I do, and I started talking, I'm a Catholic author. I'm a theologian. So we're just talking, everything's really friendly, and then I just decided, I'm just going to ask this question. So I threw it out there, go, can I just ask you guys a question? Can you tell me, as lesbians, what do you think of the Catholic Church? And all of a sudden, they got a little, you can tell, a little nervous, and and they said, well, there's some Christians that are really accepting of our life, and there's others that are, they just won't even talk to us, and and so you can tell it was a little awkward for a few minutes as they're describing their opinions about the Catholic Church, and then they turned the question back on me, and they said, well, can we ask you a question? Do we make you feel upset? Do we upset you? And right at that moment, I said, "What do you mean, upset me? No, we've been having a good conversation. We've gotten to know each other. I've really enjoyed this, and now I want to be clear. We're going to disagree on certain matters about sexuality, about the definition of marriage, and other things. And we are going to disagree about those things. But I still respect you as a person. Your children, your daughters, made in the image and likeness of God, and God calls us to love all people." So I disagree, but I could still respect you. And as soon as I used the word, I respect you, it was like their face just changed. And all of a sudden it was like, oh. And they relaxed, they loosened up. And now all of a sudden we could start talking about real issues. We start talking about, do you think why do Christians think we shouldn't be able to adopt? And I was able to give a reason, and we have a friendly conversation about it. Many times when you're in these conversations, it remains on a very emotional level. It's so emotionally charged. It's very personal. Why do you hate me? You must be judging me. And by just simply saying, I disagree, but I respect you, it all of a sudden opened the door for a substantial conversation. And they were the kind of people, if we lived in the same city, I would want to go follow up with them and keep reaching out to evangelize. But this is what Pope Francis has said. Pope Francis has said, for example, particularly with homosexual persons, he says, people should not be defined only by their sexual tendencies. Let us not forget that God loves all his creatures, and we're destined to receive his infinite love. I prefer that homosexuals come to confession, that they stay close to the Lord, and that we pray all together. We can advise them to pray, show goodwill, show them the way, and accompany them along it. And I love that's the perfect balance here. That we're in no way compromising what God is calling us to in terms of our sexuality and marriage, but we're also saying, I can still love you. In other words, I disagree does not mean I hate you. And we've got to drill this home. We've got to make that distinction between making a judgment and judging someone's soul. And when we do that, we'll find that the doors will be open for a more rational conversation about the truth than just an emotionally charged, personal conversation. All right. One last point we'll consider here. Point number 5. Relativism is not value neutral. Relativism is not value neutral. This is a very important point here. True story. There was a young college student. Her name was, we're going to change her name. Let's call her Kara. Kara came from a good Catholic family, went to Catholic youth group in high school, goes off to college and goes to Mass at the Newman Center on this big state campus, and practicing her faith her freshman year. She happens to take a political science class, and in that political science class they did a survey one day, and they're walking out of class. It was a survey about religious beliefs and politics, morals and politics. And she's walking out, one of her friends, some guy asked her, hey, what'd you say about that question about gay marriage? And she said, oh, well, I said I was against it. And he kind of smiled, and he said, oh, well, I said I was for it. Oh, well, to each his own. And kind of went on his way. Said, I'll see you at the party tonight. And, didn't seem phased. It just seemed like, okay, they just disagreed on something and everything's fine. Until Kara showed up at that party that night. She walked in the door, and as soon as he saw her come in, all of a sudden, he stood up and he said, hey, everybody, guess what she said about gay marriage in class today? She said she was against it. She said that she thought marriage is between a man and a woman. Could you believe that? And all of a sudden, everyone started going after her. Why did you say that? How could you be so judgmental? Who are you to decide for other people what marriage is? What if other people think it's this way? You're just saying this because you're a Christian. And they just kept going one after another after another. And she left that night feeling beat up. And she just had an ache in her stomach. And as she walked out the door that night, she was changed. She was changed. On that night, she started to become a relativist. Not an outward relativist, but what I like to call a relativist in her heart. What do I mean by that? In other words, this poor gal, she suffered. She wants to fit in. She wants to have friends, right? That's natural. We all want that. But she told herself, it's too hard to stand up for the truth, to stand up for my faith. It's just too hard. And so what she started doing is saying something like this, I think abortion is wrong. So she still kind of would make a statement like that. But then she'd add on two little words. Two little words. I think abortion is wrong for me. I think marriage is between a man and a woman for me. I think this and this and this for me. Just two little subtle words. But those two little words just gave her, enough space for her to feel good about herself that, okay, I still think there is kind of some right or wrong, but a way that then I can fit in with others and be able to say, well, but if others view abortion as okay, it's good for them, or if others think that marriage is not between man and woman, that's fine for them. And so allowed her to fit in more. But that's a very dangerous move we make. And I've talked to a lot of young adults, really even some really good Catholics who've made that little move in their heart for me. And it becomes a very slippery slope. Because what eventually happens over time is if you're starting to be faced with your own temptations from the culture around you, you no longer have a moral structure to cling on to. Because you've just denied that there is any kind of moral right or wrong, any moral truth really out there in the world. It's just personal taste. And just as my taste in ice cream can change, my taste in music can change, my taste in my favorite sports team can change, I guess my moral beliefs could change, and so I'll start doing this. And I've had many adults tell me, you start making that move, and then you wake up a couple of years later and you realize you're not the same person you used to be. And that's what started happening to Kara. By the end of her freshman year, she found herself doing things she never imagined doing before. And she even stopped going to church, going to Mass altogether, and was no longer a practicing Catholic. For me, there's no structure, no morality. But this is the environment in which we live. We live in a culture that puts these amazing pressures on us. Pope Benedict called this the new dogmatism, that relativism is a new dogmatism, he says, that tries to get us to think and to act and to live in a certain way. He says that I think it's time, I think it's vital that we oppose this new imposition that is coming upon us. In other words, he says, the idea of relativism is seen as the only way to think. And if you aren't a relativist, then you're going to get that slap on the hand, you're going to get that label, you're judgmental, you're intolerant. And so it's trying to get everyone to think and act the same way. But he's saying we have to begin to oppose this new imposition on our lives. So Pope Benedict has been describing how this idea of relativism is something that's being imposed upon us. Relativism is often presented as value neutral. It's kind of like the moral Switzerland. The idea that, we don't think that there's any right or wrong, and everyone could, just decide for themselves, and we're going to gather everyone together. But Pope Benedict has been emphasizing how, no, relativism is itself a certain worldview, a certain way of life that is being imposed upon us. He says, more and more, relativism becomes the generally accepted way of thinking. And the more that happens, the more it tends towards intolerance, thereby becoming a new dogmatism. Political correctness seeks to establish the domain of a single way of thinking and speaking. It prescribes itself as the only way to think and speak, if that is, one wishes to stay in fashion. Being faithful to traditional values is labeled intolerance, and relativism becomes the required norm. And then he says, I think it is vital that we oppose this imposition. So, in other words, when some people are coming in and saying, why are you so judgmental? What we need to do is push back a little bit. Gently, lovingly, but we need to push back. Here's a great one-liner for you. You ready? So just imagine this conversation. Your friend, you're talking about some moral issue, says, why are you being so judgmental? Come right back and say, excuse me, are you judging me? Are you judging me? I feel like you're judging me. I feel like you think I'm a mean, judgmental person. Well, I'm not quite saying that. Well, no, but you just said that, I'm intolerant, and I'm feeling like you're judging me. The relativist isn't used to us using the judging card. Well, you're trying to say certain things are right or wrong, and I don't think you should do that. I think that is a little judgmental, a little intolerant. Well, hold on a second here. Look, you're free. If you want to believe in relativism, that's fine. You can believe that. I'll respect you. I disagree with you, but if you want to have the belief, the faith that there is no right or wrong in the universe, if you want to have the faith that there is no moral order to the universe, that there is no truth, you're free to do that. but please do not impose your faith in relativism on me, because I believe there is a moral order to the universe. I believe there is a right or wrong. You haven't convinced me of your relativism yet. Don't impose your relativism on me. Now what that does is, all of a sudden, first of all, they're not expecting that kind of a move from a Christian, but secondly, now you can start talking about substantive issues. Yeah, because you're just assuming relativism is right, and you're imposing that on me. I'm happy to talk to you about relativism. Do you want to talk about that? Let's step back from this particular issue and talk about, is there really right or wrong? Do you really think nothing's right or wrong at all? Like genocide, terrorist attack? Do you really think, is rape, there's nothing wrong with that? Like push them. You can start pushing them on things and get them to admit certain things are right or wrong. Then you start asking them, well, how do you know what's right or wrong? And then now you're getting into a real conversation. But I think that's the key point, to bring out that moral relativism is not neutral. It is itself a certain perspective, a certain way of looking at the world. And that perspective is being imposed upon us. Pope Benedict has said we need to resist, we need to push back, we need to point that out, that no, I don't accept that way of thinking. Let's talk about the more substantive issue. Is relativism correct?
All right, a lot going on tonight. A lot going on, a lot to think about, a lot to like, I think, at least for me.
A lot of tools to put in your pouch.
Yeah, doesn't he have just incredible examples?
Yes.
So, what stuck out? Anything jump out at anybody?
Lead with grace. Lead with grace.
Lead with mercy, lead with grace.
Mercy.
Yeah. And we should do that with everything, shouldn't we? Lead with mercy, anything else? What got me, I just find a lot of what he says is just blows my mind. But what Friedrich Nietzsche said, that we can attack Christianity. We're not going to attack dogma. We're not going to attack the Eucharist. We're not going to attack Mary. We're not going to attack, this and that, the truth claims. But we're going to attack the moral fiber, the moral aspects. Isn't that what's going on in our world right now?
Yes.
I mean, one thing we need to understand about this group of people is they are so dead set on their dogma, they're willing to do this in 150 years. It doesn't have to be done tomorrow. All this stuff has been brewing. Nietzsche said it. Nietzsche said that 140 years ago. My dad used to always say, Khrushchev said that communism is going to take over the world without a shot being fired. That was in the 40s, or late 40s, early 50s, So one thing we need to understand is it's a very patient attack on our life, on our moral fiber. So I found Nietzsche, he figured it out 140 years ago, attacked the moral fiber. And that's what has happened. Anybody else get anything? Jump out? How about his examples?
Yeah, I like the way he said, because I was wondering how he was going to present how you argue with someone like that. But I like the way he said that you can't attack their morals and expect to get anywhere with them. You got to start with love and respect and and work your way, which that makes a lot of sense. That's not something I've ever thought, you know, because usually it's an aggressive situation anyway. So to be able to,
And emotional too, see.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's like it's on fire before it gets started.
right.
And my emotions and my feelings are more important than yours, and then next thing you know, it's just you're there.
And you're not
Yes.
gonna get anywhere.
And you
Right.
get nowhere.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, how many times have we gotten in arguments with our spouses, and that's where it starts? We gotta, okay, what is the real reason? It may not even be what the argument started. You know, that's not really the reason. There's something else brewing, and you have to lead with mercy. I see this with kids. You know, your kid's doing something, like he said. You know, a kid's doing something. A kid has an asthma attack. Well, why'd you play with the dog? Yeah, that's not what you're gonna do. You're gonna try to fix the problem, and then come back later and say, should have been playing with the dog. Yeah. He's amazing. He just blows my mind. He has so many tools and so many ways of doing this stuff.
That's where I've always had a challenge because I want to defend I say defend, but that's the word I think of, it's only
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
of how I feel and my beliefs and, you know, my Catholic faith, but I come across real strong, you know, and it becomes more like I'm attacking instead of just defending, you know?
Yeah.
And, the very first night here, I said, and how are we supposed to do this? And the deacon says, we're gonna get to that. And tonight we got to that.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like I'm just loaded for bear now. I'm like, bring it on! Now I can do it with love and mercy.
That's right,
You
mercy,
know?
that's right.
Before
You know,
I did not know how.
I know the deacon class has been studying ecumenism. In the last class they were in, you know, how do we as different denominations and faiths get along? And the first thing is to lead with mercy. We all have to come together. We got to stress our commonality. That's where we start. We're all humans. We all respect each other. We should respect each other. Hopefully we do. And then we can start opening up the dialogue. Anything else jump out?
Is the camera off?
No, it's on. It's like me focus in.
You want to be on camera?
No, I want to turn it off if I was gonna say something.
We got no secrets here, Robert.
It's just, you have to really sacrifice everything if you want to really stand up for what you believe. And I have two examples, one where I was a failure, one where I was successful. But I'd have to mention the names of, you know one of the persons I was gonna talk about. And I don't wanna do that.
You change the name to protect the innocent.
There was a situation in Natchitoches where I arrested someone. It was the analogy that he used with alcoholism, and he said that you can't do the first way he did it, but they talked about how you have to tell them how you love your family and you can do all these things. And I can tell you that sometimes you have to really go to almost humiliation or risk everything you have to drive the point home, because they're not going to get it until you really break them totally. I had arrested somebody, and the person that had authority over me came down and asked me to drop charges. You're going to know who the person is. And he came into the civil office, and he asked me to drop the charges, and I said, well, I arrested this person, Tommy. I said, he's been arrested 5, 6 different times for the same thing. This time he beat his mother up and he put her in the hospital. And you're asking me to, I had a history of charging everything that I could, but the district attorney knocked down what he wanted. And this is a high-ranking person, his family, I know his family very well, I could go to his house if I needed to get a warrant, or other people went because I went to church, with them, but I kinda just took my gun, after we got through, they told me, you're lucky you still have a job, but I took my gun out, I unloaded the gun in front of everybody, and I showed them that the revolver was empty, and I said, there's only one thing you can do with an alcoholic. I said, they're gonna destroy themselves, they're gonna destroy their family, and they're going to, gosh darn, keep drinking themselves down. And I pretended I had somebody in my hand. I said, you can take them outside, you can put them in the back, you can put the gun to the back of their head and I pull the trigger. And you can see his legs buckled, and he grabbed the wall, and he walked out of that. Within 1 week, he had committed himself, and he's a recovering alcoholic now. Another case is a person that I'm friends with, very good friends with, and we know I have a disability, but I was helped with Rotary, Rose Kennedy, and the United States Supreme Court Justice. I was very lucky. This person only had one person help him, and it was Notre Dame in Illinois. And her parents were, well, she didn't know who her father was. Her mother was a very, very bad life, and the school put her all the way through junior high and high school, and she's very professional. She's a medical professional. She works in a prison and helps people. Very good person, but she is not religious. Doesn't all the things that I believe in. She believes in just the opposite. But every time that I've tried to talk to her and say, look, you need to look at a different way of looking at things, she's smarter than I am. I mean, she went to Notre Dame. She knows the books both ways, and she would say, well, what about this again? She could turn it around. So when you do approach somebody with everything, risk everything to try to change it, if you're not at their level and can't reach to them, you're not gonna, you gotta make sure it's such a, you know, there's two examples that went in my head with this. It was from a stockbroker, which is, he was talking, you gotta choose this side or you can choose this side. And a stockbroker, really good, successful one, he used to say, like on a stock market, a roller coaster, the only person that gets hurt on a roller coaster is the person that jumps off. But the other analogy is that they use is the person that rides the fence and doesn't make a decision to try to speak up. The person that rides the fence always gets castrated. So you need to pick a side one way or the other, because if you stay on the fence and don't speak up, or do speak up, you're gonna end up, everybody's gonna lose. So it was a good talk, but it just brought back a lot of memories. And you gotta, no matter what it is, if it's your family, if it's a divorce, or it's drugs, or alcohol, whatever your faith is and what you believe in, you better be ready to sacrifice everything for what you believe in, because if you ride the fence, you're gonna lose.
I think that's where, because I'm not an aggressive person at all, and I'm not argumentative. So if somebody starts an argument with me, I just shut down. I don't do it. And so, that, I get intimidated by people who are aggressive. And so, you know, there's such a big lesson to be learned here, because if you don't, if you're not having a discussion on their level, if you treat them more with love and kindness and respect, and try to keep them on your level where you're talking about how you care, you know, and look, I don't know if I could do it, but it certainly, this has kind of given me a little bit of hope that maybe I can have that conversation with somebody, because normally I would not. I would be too intimidated, and I would just.
You gotta speak up, because if you don't, I mean, and I did judicial commitments, and I did work with the coroners, and I've seen the results of not speaking up. If you don't speak up, and I've gotten in trouble for using my mouth when I probably shouldn't, but I'll say what's on my mind. And
in this, when we're talking about moral relativism, we have to speak up.
Yeah.
We have to defend ourselves. We can't just continue to decline, see what it's doing to society. I'm not talking about one-on-one, I'm talking about the bigger picture. We as Christians, you know, he talked about, we have to have interventions. Yeah, it may be uncomfortable. The way he describes these things, I'd be very uncomfortable. But that's what it requires.
I always want to, make sure that I don't embarrass Jesus in my trying to evangelize or to stand up for my faith, you know. But as it turns out, in the dress-up world of trying to be a Christian and not offend anybody, I'm not taking the forward step for Jesus. I'm embarrassing him in that I don't take
don't do it.
That I don't do it,
Then
yes.
your model should be St. Peter. He just went for it.
Well, that might kind of be like my.
He may have been wrong sometimes, but he went for it. And he was ultimately rewarded. You know? It did.
Katie and I need to leave. We have to leave. We have a babysitter till 7:30.
The thing that stood out.
Next
too-
week is chapter 7, I think,
Yes, yes.
by itself.
Yes, it is. It's by itself.
Do we keep this on?
Y'all, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.